Assalomu alaykum, hurmatli ommaviy axborot vositalari, hurmatli hamkasblar, do'stlar. Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasiga xush kelibsizlar. Ma'lumki, shu kunlarda Assalomu alaykum, hurmatli ommaviy axborot vositalari, hurmatli hamkasblar, do'stlar. Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasiga xush kelibsizlar. Ma'lumki, shu kunlarda terrorizmga qarshi kurash, inson huquqlari va asosiy erkinliklarni rag'batlantirish. Assalomu alaykum, hurmatli ommaviy axborot vositalari. Menimcha hozir biz hurmatli hamkasblar, do'stlar. Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasiga xush kelibsizlar. Ma'lumki, shu kunlarda terrorizmga qarshi kurash, inson huquqlari va asosiy erkinliklarni rag'batlantirish. Assalomu alaykum. Uzr so'raymiz. Maxsus ma'ruzachimiz bugun o'zlarini dastlabki bayonotlari bilan ommaviy axborot vositalari bilan o'rtoqlashadi. Ushbu matbuot anjumanimiz o'zbek, rus va ingliz tillarida bo'ladi. Qulaylik yaratish maqsadida 3 tilda tarjima ta'minlangan. Bizning vaqtimiz biroz tig'izli bo'lgani uchun soat 8:00 da biz ushbu matbuot anjumanimizni yakunlaymiz. Уважаемые коллеги, представители средств массовой информации, добро пожаловать в представительство ООН в Республике Узбекистан. Как известно, специальный докладчик по вопросам поощрения и защиты прав человека в условиях борьбы с терроризмом Финула Ниалейн в период с 29 ноября по 7 декабря находится в Узбекистане, и цель ее миссии заключается оценка воздействия практики и законов по борьбе с терроризмом на права человека. Наша сегодняшняя конференция, пресс-конференция будет вестись на 3 языках. Это узбекский, русский и английский языки. После зачитания предварительных спецдокладчика будет возможность задать вопросы. И мы также сейчас, наша пресс-конференция транслируется на канале UN Узбекистан в режиме онлайн на YouTube. У нас есть 1 час максимально для того, чтобы задать вопросы и выслушать заявление специального докладчика. Пользуясь случаем, передаю слово нашему специальному докладчику.
Is that better? Yes, okay. So I'm particularly pleased to have had the opportunity to undertake this visit at this time. It is really important that a UN Special Rapporteur is able to conduct a country visit in the middle of a global pandemic. And I particularly appreciate and commend the government for enabling this visit in this time. Uzbekistan has joined the Human Rights Council and will take up the vice presidency of the council next year. And in setting this example of facilitating a visit to Uzbekistan by a UN Special Rapporteur, Uzbekistan is setting an example for the rest of the world that demonstrates that a human rights is back in business, that we can conduct these kinds of country assessments in a robust and fulsome way, and that we are able to continue with the work of advancing and protecting human rights, even in the middle of a global pandemic. During the course of my visit, I had the opportunity to meet with all of the government ministries relevant to my mandate at the highest level. And again, I commend the government for a robust, open and highly engaged conversation on some very difficult and sensitive issues over the course of the last week. I was also glad to travel around the country. I feel like I've been on trains, planes and automobiles for the last week. And I've not only been able to visit your beautiful country, but also engage outside Tashkent and engage in a number of regions, including Namangan, Karaikal, Pakistan, and Kashari region. Again, I was also very pleased to have the opportunity to visit 4 places of detention, 4 prisons, and 1 pretrial detention center during the course of my visit. It was also particularly important for me to meet with civil society. So in addition to my official government meetings, I had a number of meetings with civil society representatives, from lawyers, from those engaged on human rights issues on the ground in Uzbekistan. Let me start by saying a couple of things about the major findings of my report, which have been shared with you in the press release today. During the course of this 10-day visit, I focused in particular on return and repatriation of Uzbek nationals from conflict zones around the world, including Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And the report is particularly positive on the government's leadership and its practical action in this regard. As many listening outside of Uzbekistan will know, we have a serious international problem with the failure of states to bring back their nationals from northeast Syria and Iraq and other conflict zones. We have a humanitarian catastrophe occurring in northeast Syria, and we have a failure to bring out particularly children from those sites of detention. And Uzbekistan has shown that this can be done. They have had 5, as you know, 5 operations, 5 Meher operations that have taken place since May 2019. And I was able to observe firsthand during the course of these 10 days that all of government approach to this challenge. I was able to visit the rehabilitation center, the one-stop rehabilitation center established by the government. I was able to meet with all of the interdisciplinary experts who have worked on the issue of repatriation and reintegration. And I was also able to meet firsthand with returnees. And what I would say is, in its approach to this problem, the government of Uzbekistan is showing how this can be done effectively and in a human rights compliant way. And I urge other governments across the world who continue to have third country nationals in a conflict zone to follow the example that has been set by Uzbekistan and ensure the return of their nationals, particularly women and children. There were a number of things that I was really pleased to see in the process of return. The first was, as I've said, the interdisciplinary approach of the government. The second was the high level of cooperation with UN agencies, particularly UNICEF. The third was the practical commitments to ensuring that individuals would be welcomed and would be reintegrated without stigma in their society. The fourth is the attention to long-term stability and integration for these individuals, including the provision of economic, social, and cultural opportunities for individuals to return to life as normal. As many of us know, repatriation is a difficult issue, and it requires a society to embrace and support the efforts for it to work. And during the course of my time here in Uzbekistan, I was able to observe that all of society approach in a really practical way. And we know that long-term, the only way that this will work is if we engage all of society and we adopt a human rights compliant approach. I made a small number of recommendations. The first is, of course, to continue with the work that Uzbekistan is doing in this domain, to continue to set the example that we so badly need across the world on this issue. The second is to put in place a monitoring and evaluation, a human rights-based monitoring and evaluation, so that other countries in the world can learn from what has been happening in Uzbekistan, and so that we can continue to ensure that this human rights-based approach is followed in the long term. I also underscore the importance of maintaining these relationships with UN entities, to take the valuable learning that we in the UN can transfer to governments to support them in doing this difficult work, and to ensure that that kind of work continues in the long term and is transferred not only to this group of returnees, but broadly to vulnerable groups in society as a whole. In addition to repatriation, the report addressed a number of other issues, and let me briefly touch on a number of them. I paid close attention to national legal frameworks on countering terrorism and countering violent extremism. I am aware that the government is in process of substantial legal review of the criminal code, the criminal procedural code, and the penitentiary code. And I make a number of highly practical recommendations about the ways in which, in particular, crimes related to national security, counterterrorism, and extremism can be amended in order to ensure full compliance with international law. As I and other special rapporteurs have said in other contexts, we have some concerns about the use of the term extremism, in the sense that the concept of extremism is extremely broad and can be very vague, and as a matter of legal certainty, lacks the kind of precision that we require to ensure the fairness that is necessary under a state's international human rights obligations. I make clear in the report that non-violent criticism of state policy and actors should never constitute a criminal offense, because the peaceful expression of freedom of expression and thought is pivotal to any society which is governed by the rule of law and which abides by its human rights principles and obligations. Let me also note that the mandate made a number of observations on the law and the regulation of countering terrorism financing. Here I underscore the need for ensuring that the regulation of terrorism financing is both human rights compliant and compliant with FATF recommendation 8. And in this regard, the issue which I have highlighted is the negative impact of countering terrorism finance on civil society. And so I encourage and support review and reform of legislation to ensure that countering terrorism finance provisions do not unduly restrict civic space and civil society. Let me highlight two other issues that the mandate addressed very closely. The first was the issue of accountability and addressing the challenge of torture, inhuman, and degrading treatment under national law and practice. And in this regard, the mandate has recognized that significant positive steps have been made in Uzbekistan in recent years in this regard. I particularly highlight the commitment to signing OPCAT, signing and ratification of the optional protocol of the Convention against Torture. And I also highlight the establishment of a monitoring system by the Ombudsman. However, I make a number of additional suggestions to government to enhance and ensure full compliance with the Convention against Torture, and to ensure that we put in place systems of accountability. Here, the Special Rapporteur particularly focuses on two things. The first is human rights training and knowledge by those who are involved in the oversight of penitentiaries and law enforcement. The second issue I would highlight is the mandate's recommendation that there be a system of review or a mechanism created to review cases pre-2016 which relate to national security cases in which torture, inhuman, and degrading treatment may have been applied. The mandate believes that it's particularly important as we look forward to prevent torture, that we also look back and ensure that there's accountability for serious violations which may have taken place previously. And in the spirit of the government's openness and commitment to preventing torture, I strongly believe that this kind of mechanism will be important to deepen rule of law reforms, to ensure accountability and to send a really strong message about the intolerance for torture, inhuman and degrading treatment in the past. Let me close by saying that I addressed a number of other issues which I'm happy to speak to or answer questions on. Those include issues related to non-refoulement. The report specifically addresses the situation of persons from Afghanistan who find themselves situated on the territory of Uzbekistan in the aftermath of the events of August this year. I've been particularly pleased to hear the commitment from the government that there will be no forced return. And I encourage and support the regularization of the situation of those who are here on the territory, many who came on short-term visas, many who are clearly vulnerable, whom I and the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees recognize as being persons in need of international protection. I want to close by just acknowledging the spirit, the positive spirit of dialogue and the really both difficult and good conversations that I had as Special Rapporteur in the past 10 days. There are serious commitments to reform and to consolidation of reform in Uzbekistan. These serious commitments are really important in a time of global retreat from human rights. And I strongly commend them and hope that we at the UN can work closely to ensure the delivery of these reforms so that each person in the country has the opportunity to live a dignified, full, fair, and human rights infused life. So I'm very glad to be here and very glad to take your questions.
Рахмат, мархабат. Савал, жаваб кысмызга o'tamiz. Пожалуйста, мы приступаем к сессии вопросов и ответов. Если можно представиться тоже и вкратце ваш вопрос. Спасибо.
Салам алейкум. Мирослав Ахраров, Овози Таджик, газета Овози Таджик. У меня к вам два вопроса. Первый вопрос. Как вы оцениваете работу омбудсмена Республики Узбекистан?
Just to make sure I'm getting the translation. Thanks.
Я спрашиваю, как вы оцениваете работу омбудсмена Узбекистана? И насколько вы осведомлены работой этой организации? И второй мой вопрос такой. Вообще-то, мне попросили спросить вас. Скажите, пожалуйста, по каким критериям нанимаются постоянные сотрудники ООН в Узбекистане? Можете сказать, что здесь связи, знакомые, коррупция и подобные отсутствуют? Спасибо.
Thank you for the question. So let me say that I had the distinct pleasure to meet with not only the Ombudsman, but the Ombudsman for Children and the Ombudsman for Business Matters in Uzbekistan. I believe the Office of the Ombudsman is a singularly important office. This office, I think, has significantly strengthened the commitment in practice to human rights in Uzbekistan. And it's clear that the ombudsperson herself is committed to many of these issues in practice in a deep and personal way. I also note the very important role that the ombudsperson plays in the system of oversight and monitoring. Now, it is clear that, in my view, that system can be strengthened. There's room for strengthening on the prevention of torture, inhuman and degrading treatment in particular. But I know that we've made an excellent start and that there is clear progress being made on this issue, supported and led by the Ombudsman. So the report, and I think both acknowledges this work, recognizes the value of the work, and hopes to work more closely with the Ombudsman as we move beyond this report to further practical engagement with the enforcement of human rights in Uzbekistan. I should say that in relation to hiring practice, this is ultra vires my mandate. I am an independent expert on counterterrorism and human rights, but I can assure you that in every country in the world, UN appointment go through a rigorous and independent process. I know that myself because as someone who was appointed by the UN, my own process was subject to those kinds of requirements. So I hope that is a helpful answer, at least to the question, although it is formally outside the scope of my mandate.
Marhamat, Alisher Ro'zaxunov.
Assalomu alaykum. Ikkita savolim bor edi. Ikkita aytib o'tsam, birinchi savolim aynan Afg'onistondagi hukumat davlat o'zgarishidan keyin ko'plab qochqinlar, muhojirlar O'zbekistonga ham o'tdi va O'zbekiston orqali boshqa davlatlarga ham ketdi. Mana shu sizni izlanishlaringiz davomida ayta olasizmi? Umuman O'zbekistondagi nodavlat jamoat birlashmalari.
Sorry. It's like it switches. Can you try again? I can't hear the English translation. That's the problem. As soon as you can, but I can't. Try now, Natalia.
Tarjima ketyaptimi?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good. Savolim shundan iboratki, Afg'onistondagi siyosiy o'zgarishlardan keyin Markaziy Osiyo mintaqasidagi ko'plab davlatlar, xususan O'zbekistonda ham radikalizm va diniy ekstremizmni oshish xavf-xatarlari ham davlat tomonidan, ham nodavlat yes.
We're going to swap. Going to swap. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yana bir marta qaytarib o'taman-da.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go.
Afg'onistondagi siyosiy o'zgarishlardan keyin Markaziy Osiyo mintaqasida ko'plab davlatlar, xususan O'zbekistonda ham davlat tashkilotlari tomonidan, ham nodavlat jamoat birlashmalari tomonidan radikalizm yoki diniy ekstremizmni salbiy fonda oshib borishi xavfi kutildi. Sizni o'rganishlaringiz davomida bu narsani qanday baho bera olasiz? Markaziy Osiyoda Afg'onistondagi o'zgarishlar radikalizmga yoki diniy ekstremizmni oshishiga qanchalik xizmat qildi yoki qilmayapti? Ikkinchi savolim esa birozgina mavzudan chetlangan holatda kuni kecha AQShdagi Senat vakillari AQSh davlat departamentiga inson huquqlari bo'yicha O'zbekistonga yanada bosimni kuchaytirish kerakligi to'g'risida xat yo'llanganini biz guvoh bo'ldik. Bu xat e'lon qilindi ommaviy. Sizni bunga munosabatingiz qanday? O'zbekistonga aynan dunyodagi rivojlangan bir davlatlar tomonidan inson huquqlarida yanada ishlarni rivojlantirish kerak yoki bosimni kuchaytirish kerak mazmunidagi bunday ommaviy chaqiriqlar nimalar bilan bog'lanishi mumkin? Sabablar nimadan iborat? Rahmat.
Great. Thank you. So let me start by addressing the political changes in Afghanistan. First, by acknowledging the pivotal role that Uzbekistan is playing at this time. So I see the government as taking a highly pragmatic and sensible role in relation to the challenges in the neighborhood, as it were. It's been very clear that Uzbekistan is focused on a number of things. The first is the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. And as I have heard at the highest levels this week, it is very clear that the primary goal that we must all be focused on is preventing humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan, because it is humanitarian catastrophe which will provide the conditions for extremism or violence. If we can prevent humanitarian catastrophe, we go a long way towards the stabilization of the kinds of radical movements that you have described. It is entirely in the interest of the international community to support countries in the region, including Uzbekistan, to help stabilize the situation in Afghanistan. And here I note and commend in the report the important initiatives that that Uzbekistan has taken to provide electricity to Afghanistan and to ensure and help in the provision of humanitarian assistance. I think it is somewhat too early to tell what the implications of the new regime or de facto authorities in Afghanistan will be. We wait and watch the assurances that they have given about the control and prevention of violence from other splinter groups within the territory. But I would say, from my mandate's perspective, the most effective inoculation against extremism is human rights. The most effective thing that prevents radicalization is rule of law. The thing that works to prevent violence is good governance. If you do those things right, then you essentially eliminate many of the conditions that produce the violence in the first place. So our goal in Afghanistan, supporting countries in the region, including in particular Uzbekistan's increasingly important role in relation to stabilization in Afghanistan, is to prevent catastrophe, humanitarian catastrophe. In relation to your question about the US State Department or other governments putting pressure, my view is that the issue of human rights is not about government pressure. It's about our own commitments within each society to human rights and human dignity. As you will be aware, the president of Uzbekistan addressed the 46th session of the Human Rights Council some months ago. And there he made clear, and his government made clear, that the commitment to human rights is from within Uzbekistan. It's driven by the needs, the desires, and the commitment of Uzbek people. So that's where we drive our commitment from. States will put pressure here and there, but human rights doesn't belong to any one state. It belongs to every state. And in this regard, the human rights impulses come from within Uzbekistan, not outside Uzbekistan. And that has certainly been my experience this week in terms of the commitments and the desires that we hear both from the commitments within government, but also the desire from ordinary people to live dignified lives where their rights are protected, including their economic, their social, their cultural, and their civil and political rights.
Дмитрий Поваров, агентство РИА Новости, Российская Федерация.
Дмитрий Поваров, агентство РИА Новости, Россия. Если позволите, два вопроса по международной повестке. В январе вы подписали призыв к новому президенту США Джо Байдену о закрытии тюрьмы Гуантанамо. По-вашему, есть ли варианты наконец-то закрыть Гуантанамо? Что для этого нужно делать, что нужно предпринять, чтобы ускорить этот процесс? И второй вопрос, поскольку в вашей должности там есть и такая фраза, как борьба с терроризмом, сколько, по вашим данным, по вашим оценкам, остается вот боевиков ИГИЛ, Исламского государства, в пленных, и где они сейчас находятся, в каких условиях, и, в принципе, вот если закрывать тюрьмы такие, как Гуантанамо, что с ними делать дальше? Спасибо. Все дошло,
Thank you. So on the question of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, you are correct. In January, I did issue a statement, a strong statement to the US administration. It has been my view for a long period that the closure of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba is imperative. It is a stain on the conscience of humanity that we have 39 men still held in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, 29 of whom have never been charged with a single crime. It is unacceptable that people are held for almost 2 decades, who were subject to torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, and who have not yet been released. I continue with other special rapporteurs to press for their release. Their release is an imperative. And I have personally visited Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and so I am profoundly aware of the conditions of detention in that camp. In relation to your second question on militants, so I can't give you a global figure. I don't have a global figure. We do have some understanding of the numbers of men who are held in detention in northeast Syria in various prison facilities, which runs into the thousands. My view on that is that the detention of men who may or may not be associated with ISIS, we need to have a fair screening and determination, a legally rigorous process of screening and assessment. And we cannot hold, just as we cannot hold persons arbitrarily at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, we cannot arbitrarily hold persons in northeast Syria. It's the same problem. Both demand the same solution, which is a rule of law compliant mechanism to ensure that those who have committed crimes are charged and prosecuted, and those who have not are set free.
Thank you.
Marhaban.
Nice to meet you here in Uzbekistan. So my name is Sadokat. I'm from TV channel Uzbekistan 24. My question will be about your meeting with the head of our country. So as you said, Uzbekistan is actively developing cooperation with United Nations. So at this time, what kind of issues were discussed and what was the main topic of this meeting?
Thank you. It's very nice to be in Uzbekistan. I've had enormous hospitality in the past week, and I think I've probably eaten more food than I have ever eaten in my life in the last 10 days. I had an excellent meeting with the head of state. We had a very long meeting where we discussed all of the priorities that the president has set out in his ambitious agenda before the Human Rights Council, from disability to gender affairs, to youth, to education, to the SDGs, to rule of law and justice reforms. I see the scale of ambition and commitment and the passion for these issues in the meeting that I had. And as I observed at that meeting, it's rare often to see such passion for these issues, and I welcome it. We also had the opportunity to talk about some of the difficult issues, the sensitive issues in my report, including discussions around the regulation of extremism, the issues that relate, for example, to the histories, difficult histories for Uzbekistan of the past. And the president assured me that the country is not going back, the country is looking forward and seeking to really transform itself in relation to human rights. And it's the commitment to doing that, but also the practical implementation of that we spoke about. And I look forward actually to ongoing. We discussed many opportunities for further collaboration between the mandate, the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, with the Office of the President and the government. Thank you.
Marhaban.
Mida Qadirova from My5 TV channel. In this press release said that Uzbek model want to use other governments. Which governments want to use this Uzbek model, escaping from the war areas, children and women? And I want to know also, you in your speech said that Uzbekistan should change laws about terrorism. And which aspects should change?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I view the work that has been done by Uzbekistan on repatriation and reintegration as a model for other countries. And I mean all 57 countries who have third country nationals, particularly in Iraq and Syria. We need a practical solution for the problem in northeast Syria. And Uzbekistan is showing how to make that practical solution happen. And it's not just doing it at a lofty, rhetorical, symbolic level, but it is actually bringing home women and children and doing the hard work of reintegration. And I spend many of my days talking to other governments who simply refuse to bring back their children, who do not treat their children as children, and who use language that stigmatizes, that excludes, and that discriminates. And Uzbekistan is doing exactly the opposite. It has welcomed and acknowledged the need to bring children home. It has supported and allowed the mothers to reintegrate back into society. And it's providing a model for them to become useful and reintegrated citizens. And I simply wish that all of the other countries who have their nationals in camps would do exactly the same. Then we would have a solution to the problem we face in Northeast Syria. On the reform of legislation, I'm particularly interested in the criminal code, on the provisions that relate to extremism, 244.1, 244.2, Article 159 as an example. I believe that these provisions need to be amended to be more precise. They're currently very ambiguous and wide. And my concern is that they capture a set of behaviors that are protected by international law, including freedom of expression and freedom of religious belief. And precisely because there is a process of legal reform happening, because these legislations are under review, there's a unique opportunity for the government to align the revision of the criminal code with the best international standards. And in this regard, I would also hope that Uzbekistan will be a model, that we could see Uzbekistan leading in the region, showing how to do this reform in a way that really keeps the precision, the clarity, the rule of law and human rights compliance at the heart of these provisions in the criminal code. Yeah, thanks.
Marhamat, yana kimda savollar? Пожалуйста, у кого вопросы?
If we're done, I eat a lot of Uzbek food tonight before I get on a plane.
Agar savollar bo'lmasa, bugungi uchrashuvimizni yakunlaymiz.
I can say some final
Yeah.
remarks. Yeah, sure. So I want to begin as I started, which is to acknowledge the important leadership role that Uzbekistan will have on the Human Rights Council next year as vice president of the council. And this is a unique opportunity for Uzbekistan to be a leader on global human rights. It's a unique opportunity to bring together a marriage. And the marriage is the advancement of human rights protection at the national level, implementing reforms in the area of justice, penitentiary reforms, criminal code reforms, but also presenting that and showing other countries what's being done so that they can follow good example. I've had a uniformly positive dialogue with the government this week. I often go to countries where I don't have good dialogue, but this week has been a week of excellent dialogue with the government. I see since 2016 a wave of serious and ambitious rule of law, economic and social reforms being initiated by the government. And it is this initiation, but the implementation of these reforms, which is at the core of the work that lies ahead. I think that one of the things that I leave Uzbekistan with is the optimism that really serious human rights work is possible, that serious human rights work is being done, and that more is coming, and that this is embraced by the government, wanted by civil society, and supported by the population as a whole. And the UN stands ready to help, because our goal is to help you reach the goals that you have. So thank you very much.
Rahmat, yana bir bor barchangizga kechki payt soat 7 ga qaramasdan kelganingiz uchun rahmat, minnatdorchilik beramiz. ishlaringizga omad. Rahmat. Спасибо большое всем.
Thank you very much.